good afternoon again on this live talk. We want to thank you so much for joining us as you always do on a weekly basis. And it is always such a blessing to share in ministry with you. If you're making it to the broadcast, we want to say to you, welcome. We have a special live talk for you. I am joined by a very dear friend and a professional on a number of levels. He wears a lot of hats. Anthony Joseph is a psychotherapist. He also has a great background in finance, and he is a genealogist. And this is what we will be talking about on this special live talk edition. So, Anthony, why don't you tell us a bit about what inspired your journey through the field of geology and what allows you to do that with such passion? And tell us a little bit about what that is, anyway, for anybody who is somewhat confused.
Good afternoon, Pastor. Thank you for having me on your show. I'm honored.
Always.
Thank you very much. As you know, I'm a banker by day and therapist on the weekends, but my true passion has always been genealogy. I have been a researcher for over 25 years. This lifelong quest has helped me to better know my family's past. I was so impressed with the way that my parents knew their own families that I wanted to find out more on my own. The problem was, for the most part, they held all the information in their head. And I just felt that, I live in a computerized society. Let me plug it into Excel spreadsheet or something so that at least it's electronic. Lo and behold, when I came back up to the States and I started working on my family tree, the more that I went back one generation, there was a further longing to go back even further. And so today, I have gone back to about 1610 on my father's side, which spans 12 generations. I have taken my DNA tests on my father's side. His ancestors came from Nigeria, West Africa, and we belong to the ethnic groups Igbo, Hausa, and Yoruba. On my mother's side, we came from Sierra Leone, West Africa, and we belong to the Mende people. As you know, I have completed my genealogy certification, and I'm working towards board certification. I have researched almost 50,000 names in Dominica, including 12,000 marriages, primarily in the north of Dominica, but I've also helped a lot of friends and families and clients across Dominica. So I've done a broad spectrum across Dominica, and that continues to inspire me to research further and hope that I can entice more people to embrace genealogy.
That is very incredible, especially speaking about 50,000 cases that you have dealt with, cases in terms of the number of names that you have researched to point. Now, you've lived in the United States for most of your life. So you are native Dominican from Dominica, but your life here has been in the US. Do you do much of your genealogy work here as well?
Yes, I do. But I from time to time, I have to go back to Dominica because that's where most of the records are located. And so I do a lot of church visits during my two-week vacation there. I visit the cemeteries. I review the indentures and grants and land records, the wills and probate records, newspapers, the registry, and the churches. I visit quite a bit to get all of this information. And so I take it back up with me, I plug it into my computer, and I analyze it throughout to get a better idea of how all families are connected.
Yes, I do recall when I spoke to you about tracing my family side. I was fascinated by how quickly you had gotten back to me when I gave you my father's side of our history. and also my mother's side. The information that you gave me was very incredible because you did not know any of these details to that depth. So when you revealed that, it was very fascinating to me. Tell us a bit because the Bible's entire, and you're a Christian man, very devoted Christian individual, and a lot of our conversations are along those lines. A family man, you know, and someone who definitely is also very intrigued in learning more about the Bible. A lot of the Bible is on genealogy. So when you look at the world today and you're doing all this research, all this homework about tracing families, like you just said, your mother's side of the family is what, Sierra Leone?
Correct.
Right. So then your father's side, Nigeria?
Correct.
Right. So that is intriguing. That helps. That puts you now on the motherland.
Mhm.
So, how important is the understanding of where we came from so we know where we're going?
It's critical because if you don't know where you came from, you really don't know where you're headed. And so that's why I encourage as many people to do their genealogy as possible because it gives you a sense of identity, an identity which has been robbed from us, but we're still able, through DNA analysis, to go back to the motherland. And so it's critical because it tells you the traits that you carry, the habits that you have, the good and bad habits that you have, the darling sins that you carry around day by day. You know, it it started somewhere, or it's starting with you. And so, as we get into the conversation, we'll explore that more because those things can likely turn into iniquities. Yeah. So
Well, I look
that's
forward to us talking about that aspect of the spiritual. So let's not go into it because that's a hot topic. I really want us to save it for after you help us to understand as it relates to tracing family tree. You've spoken about DNA now for a couple of times since our dialogue began. Amongst the things that I discovered, though, could it sometimes be tricky and maybe even dangerous to trace your family line? Because what if a father discovered the children are not his? Or, you know, so there are surprises that could pop up because you're dealing with DNA, you're dealing with tracing family history, and there are secrets in families. So, have you in your bringing families together and tracing lineages, have any of these surprises come up, or is that something that could come up?
absolutely. And that's why, as a genealogist, you never get hung up on a name. So, for example, my last name is Joseph, but is it Joseph that's flowing through my blood, or is it is it Joseph that's flowing through my DNA?
Wow.
It could be any other name. So, for example, as I did my own genealogy and I went further back, we emanated from the Brumant family. And so, in the town of Portsmouth, where there are pockets of Josephs all over, because Joseph is the most common surname in Dominica, I just quickly discovered that we are only related to one other family, Joseph, in Portsmouth. And that's because that family too came from the Brumant branch from Vacans. And so I hasten not to label anybody by a particular name, or even when I'm researching, to get hung up on just that name. Because even in the 1800s and early 1900s, a woman was considered the property of her husband. And if you were a slave, you were property of your master.
Mm.
And so today, somebody doing their research may find out that, daddy is not really daddy, you know?
My
It
Lord
could
and my God.
it's somebody different, you know? And so today I'm helping a lot of families who did not know who their father was or who their mother was in the case of uh, abbreviated death, in the family, or foster care. If you landed in foster care, you won't, chances are you don't know who your biological parents are. And so today, a lot of people are doing their DNA analysis, trying to find out who were my biological parents. And so if you haven't done your genealogy, which is just tracing your lineage through the records, then the DNA might help you a bit, but you need to make that connection. And the way you do that connection is by seeing who are your first and second cousins clustering around you in your DNA analysis. And then telling somebody like me who've gathered so much information, I see a lot of Victor clustering around my name. Can you tell me where that name is from? Victor is very common in Dublin. It's very common in Vegas. And so I start to look into my database and I see, oh, I have this person here and they came from that family and these are their parents. So if it's a match on your side that you're looking for, Victor, then you can possibly go back to who your biological parent is. But it takes years, it takes time, it takes a lot of research, it takes a lot of patience, but it's worth the while because especially as a therapist, I've come to realize that a young girl growing up in a house without a father is devastating on many levels. First of all, she doesn't have a true sense of identity or self-esteem because her father is her first love. And his absence in the house, it affects the male also, but more so the female, because she identifies with that man as her first caretaker, her first love. And so when he's absent, a couple of things biologically happens. Her hormones kick in. Her breasts are enlarged, her buttocks are enlarged, and so she's more prone to being raped and molested.
Mm.
And also, she yearns so much for that father figure that she goes out when she's of age to look for her father. And of course, a lot of times she looks in the wrong places to find that father. And so trauma begins to set in.
And I see your psychotherapy is kicking in, something that we talk about very often. But while we're on this topic, would that by any means relate to a woman of the nature that you've just described, which is sadly and unfortunately prevalent, particularly in impoverished communities, minority communities, where you often find that the male presence is absent, especially on this side of the world where there is mass incarceration, especially within communities of color. Does the woman's choice to date older men or marry older men play into that desire to have a father figure, or is it just luck and well, we don't believe in luck, but just romance? Or is all of that trauma playing into that desire to have that kind of representation in the life because it was not present?
Absolutely. And in poor communities, you find that more prevalent than ever because, you're in an apartment with a single mother, for example, who the father is no longer there. She has like 4 or 5 kids. It's a probably sometimes a 1-bedroom apartment. And so, there's boundaries are crossed. And so trauma sets in very, very early. And so when she's of age, she goes out into the community and tries to identify. And who does she try to identify with? A father figure, as somebody who can show her the way. And most times, that person is not showing her the right way. Yeah. And so she ends up being very disappointed over time.
Or hurt, or abused, mistreated,
Absolutely.
violated, and all the other negative responses when
yeah,
you don't know who you are and you don't know your identity and you are on a desperate search for love and
absolutely.
acceptance.
Yeah, yeah.
All of those traumatic domino effects, which is
Hmm.
why it is so important on our journeys in our vocations and our professions, whether as a psychotherapist or as a minister, a pastor, a coach throughout life, that, we take time to hear the stories before we come to judgments about the behaviors and the actions, because there is so much depth to what makes a person do the things that they do. So absolutely. So with that, yeah, you wanted to say something on that?
Yes,
Okay.
and that's why, as a banker, you're trained in numbers. It's black or it's white. And so the good Lord had to take me out from banking for a few years and made me become a social worker, infuse compassion, be non-judgmental, and to be able to see people at their level and have an appreciation for them. So when I worked in the South Bronx, these were the best years of my life because
Wow.
I saw poverty in its real sense.
Mm,
And it was the first time being in that environment and seeing all of the mental diseases that could ever happen to a family and dysfunctionalism in the family. But there was such a sense of togetherness. There was such a sense of love.
despite all the dysfunction.
Absolutely. So it makes you look at your own life and wonder, wow, how ungrateful can you be? You know?
Right.
And to thank God for the life that you have, because so many people have a lesser life than you.
Wow.
And
This
so it
is
helps
really profound.
yeah, it helps
It,
bridge that gap.